Taking you around the United States of soccer. Here's Jason Davis.
Friday edition of the United States of Soccer last night in Philadelphia. The U.S. Women's National Team beat Portugal 4-0 as part of the Victory Tour. 45,000 plus on hand, a record for a standalone friendly for the U.S. women. Popularity never higher. A couple of stars missing in that game. Let's talk to our friend Jen Cooper from Houston. KeeperNotes.com covers the women's game as good as anybody. Jen, how are you?
Doing pretty good, Jason.
I appreciate you coming by. This Victory Tour rolls on. The U.S. women rack up more wins and more goals. It's hard for me to kind of pin down what we should talk about with a game like this. What did you take away from it?
Well, first, I have to add to your comment about the attendance. It was almost 50,000. It was just 500 short of a 50,000 crowd.
49,000, yes, right.
Yeah, which was a great number to see. But there were actually some decent takeaways from this because, like I said, there's not always something relevant from a Victory Tour. But what's different about this Victory Tour compared to 2015 is Jill Ellis is stepping down in a few matches. So we're seeing some freedom in her lineups and subbing that we didn't even see in the 2015 Victory Tour, and seeing some call-ups this early because of different call-ups because, Alex Morgan, Rapinoe, Lavelle being injured. So Christian Hamilton from North Carolina, who has been lighting up the field all season, actually leads North Carolina, the defending champion, goal. She got her first ever call-up. She hasn't been capped yet. I bet we'll see that Tuesday. And then also Casey Short, who narrowly missed making the World Cup roster. She got a call in and played as well. And what really surprised me about this match was Adriana Franch got her second cap. We actually played a different keeper. So it was a different kind of Victory Tour match. Subtle, but different.
Okay. I mean, look, obviously with Jill Ellis not necessarily having to worry about being in charge next year when this team goes to the Olympics, which we presume they will do out of qualifying in CONCACAF. Yeah, that is an interesting wrinkle. Do you think that there's at all a thought on her part of I'm going to do some things that might set the team up for whoever's next? Is that part of it, or is it just literally I don't have to be as concerned about how this progresses? I can, especially against a team like Portugal, who's really not going to put up much of a fight.
I think it's a little of both. I mean, one, she's a coach. She can't help coaching. She's not going through the motions. She's doing this for real. She has spent so much time developing and identifying talent. Remember, she was a college coach. She coached the U20 women's national team. So I think it's just in her nature to, hey, let me keep looking, let me keep developing. And because the pressure is off, okay, she's won 2 World Cups. Only one other person in the world has won back-to-back World Cups, and she doesn't have to worry about it anymore. So there is a little bit more freedom. And your time is short. So hey, let's do some things now that maybe I couldn't have done last year. I would also think that there could be a little bit more freedom in the CBA. We don't have publicly all the details of the current CBA. We probably will eventually, given how the lawsuit is going. But the fact that this Victory Tour is shorter than previous ones, and that we're seeing other players called in earlier, which we didn't see in 2015, tells me that there's a little bit more freedom on that side as well.
Interesting. That is an interesting part of this. We're talking to Jen Cooper from KeeperNotes.com, the U.S. Women's National Team on the Victory Tour. Jason Davis with you on a Free Kick Friday episode of the United States of Soccer. There are 2 prongs here with the Jill Ellis thing that I'm fascinated by, Jen. One is Jill Ellis herself and what's next. And I know she's going to have this ambassador role, whatever the heck that means. How do you go from back-to-back world champions to anything else? What does she do?
Especially when think about it, there is no other women's coaching job in the world that pays as much as she's been paid. Sure, you can compare her salary to Jurgen Klinsmann and see how little she was paid compared to that. But there's no other women's coaching job that pays as much. She's already done college. She's already done youth. You've won 2 World Cups. Yeah, what do you do? I think the ambassador role is a way for her to stay somewhat connected, but in a less pressure, less travel role, while she decides what she wants to do next, which could be, do I want to try coaching a men's team? Do I want to get into coaching education? Or do I just want to kick up my heels and just be that hired, speaker every now and then that gets a nice honorarium every time you speak, I don't see her taking that last course. I really don't. But I think the ambassador role gives her an option, the time and space to decide, like, what do I want to do next? And maybe, like, put the feelers out there. Because I've heard really great things from, people inside coaching who have taken coaching courses with her, that she's so good at what she does in terms of planning, tactics, player identification. So it would be interesting to see what she decides to do when she steps away from that ambassador role.
The idea of her maybe breaking that glass ceiling and taking a job with a men's team, that's interesting to me. I know there's been a couple of instances in some places. I think South America, we've had one, maybe lower leagues in Europe somewhere. I would be fascinated by that. She doesn't seem like the type to be the trailblazer in terms of a firebrand, but certainly maybe that actually works to her benefit, or maybe that works to the benefit of the club that hires her.
Well, and I think because she approaches it just from the I'm just coaching, and that she's not a former player, so it's not coming from that angle. It's just, when you built up that cred of, sure, I know, men's clubs could say, oh, it's women's soccer, but it's back-to-back women's World Cups, the highest licenses possible. It might be worth the risk.
Now, the other side of that is, of course, for the team is what next. And while the Victory Tour, as you described it, is shorter than in the past, it still pushes us up very close to sort of the end of the calendar year. And you have the Olympics next year in Japan, and you'll have an Olympic qualification tournament sometime in early 2020. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what Kate Markgraf's going to do with that position, considering it's going to be hard for anybody to put a real stamp on this team before that tournament comes around in Japan.
I think it's going to be almost impossible. And we've only seen this twice in the U.S. team history where there's been a coaching change between a World Cup and the Olympics. So when Tony DeCicco stepped down at the end of '99 and April Heinrichs came on board, and then, of course, in 2007 with the very dramatic World Cup blowout, losing to Brazil in the semis, and then P.S. Sundaga coming on board a month later to replace Greg Ryan. I still look at P.S. Sundaga's gold medal with that 2008 team as like the biggest accomplishment a U.S. women's coach has ever done, to take a team in basically 8 months that was pretty splintered and not getting along, and lost a lot of good players. And then Abby Wambach breaks her leg a week before they leave for China, and they still pull out the gold medal. But it's a huge challenge. Qualifying doesn't really concern me. Right. When you look at CONCACAF, it's just not. It's not challenging. Granted, there's only one. There's 2 slots. So as long as they win their semi, they're in. So it's qualifying is not, to me, so much the issue as prepping the overall team. Now, compared to last cycle, we've lost no one from the Women's World Cup. This time, 4 years ago, you had Lauren Holiday retire, Shannon Box retire, Abby Wambach retire, Lori Kolupny retire. A couple players get pregnant. It's like, so there was a lot of self-elimination, for lack of a better word. This time, you have all 23 players that are still going strong. Even Carly Lloyd is not pulling herself out of this race. And you only have 18 players for the Olympics, and the Olympics don't start till late July. So you've got more of the NWSL season to use to decide who you want to take. I mean, this NWSL season did not impact the 2019 World Cup because by the time Jill had to name the roster, the season had just started. But you still have this incredibly competitive domestic league to pull players from. So I think the challenge might be, the coach putting the stamp, but it won't be a challenge of available talent.
Okay, well, that sounds like a good thing. I understand why. I mean, you just have a team that just won the World Cup, and I get that. But we're also talking about a program that has sort of been marked by players claiming a spot and then having to be really pushed out, or they have to eliminate themselves rather than a coach having complete freedom. And part of that's the CBA and some of that to say, these are my players. These are the women that I want to go with. And I'm not gonna be the one to suggest that Megan Rapinoe doesn't have a place in the Olympic team, Jen, and she got to get back on the field first. But if a coach if a coach really believes that they're better without Megan Rapinoe, is that coach going to have that power and the backing of everybody and be able to put that forward without sort of being roundly criticized across all sorts of different segments of the American soccer community?
I would say that coach, or whoever the coach is going to be for the Olympic team, has more freedom to do that than any coach in the last several cycles. Maybe not complete freedom, but way more freedom than Jill Ellis had, say, with the 2015 team, where it was pretty clear she inherited the 25 players on contract and was told, make it work with this. Whereas she got to choose a lot more with the 2019 team. And we've even seen camps where she deliberately didn't call up players. Say last year when Christian Press was not with the club. She had chosen not to report to Houston. Right. She was looking for another contract. Jill Ellis did not call her up to the next U.S. national team camp. She sent a message right there saying, if you're not with the team, you're not training full time, you're not good enough to be on the national team. Compare that to 2015, before the 2015 World Cup, where Abby Wambach decides she's not going to play in the league because she needs to rest for the World Cup. That wouldn't fly anymore.
Sure,
so
that's a good point.
And the CBA, some of the changes in the CBA, some of the ones that they're aware of, is that each year there's fewer and fewer players contracted, given an annual contract, and that's giving more and more freedom to coaches to call in others who might not be on full contracts, like, say a Kristen Hamilton with the Victory Tour. So I'm not going to say that the next coach has all the freedom to say, hey, Rapinoe, you're not fit enough, but that coach will have more freedom than the last several coaches did.
Talking to Jen Cooper, KeeperNotes.com, about the U.S. Women's National Team. Jason Davis with you on a Friday. And part of the reason I asked that is because, maybe that's not an issue for the Olympics next year. It's only a year out from a World Cup title, but you look at the age of this squad, and it's not exactly youthful. So I'll ask you sort of beyond what this coach might do, whoever that is. We got Tiana Davidson, Mallory Pugh, Rose Lavelle still 24. That's Lindsey Horan's going to be around for a while. How much new blood are we looking at, though? I mean, maybe not for the Olympics, but who are those players that we should be keeping an eye out for?
Well, there's been a pretty big pool of young players, U20s, that Jill has brought in over the years, most of them not capped, but several of them getting a couple senior camps under their belts. And this is something that we saw with Rose Lavelle's development as well. She was pulled into several camps before she eventually got capped. So, again, that speaks to Jill's eye for long-term development. So I would think from the U20s like Brianna Pinto or Sophia Smith or Jalen Howell, players that are now in college, and I bet we'll see probably not in the 2020 cycle, but probably right after that. And similar to that, there's been so much talent in the NWSL, especially a World Cup year where you have that 8 to 10 game gap where the national teamers are gone. So that means that players that don't normally get as much minutes get a time to shine. And that's where I think, any coach would be foolish not to look at some of those players that have that have performed well, like Christian Hamilton or Midge Purse at Portland Thorns, who's been amazing.
Yeah.
And there's another young player. She's only 2 years out of college. She's
Right.
playing for one of the top teams in the country, arguably the world, and she has only one fewer goal than Christine Sinclair. So, there's so much talent there, and I just, I'm so hopeful with what changes I have heard about the CBA, that it seems like more and more of these players have an opportunity to be called in, and it's not like you were describing what we had in the past of, once you got in the club, your spot was good until you chose to retire, and that is no way to run a national team.
Let me finish with this. This is not directly about this team. It's sort of more about women's soccer in general, Jen, because you're talking about, okay, there's Midge Purse is 2 years out of college. That's a young player. I have to kind of remember when I'm thinking about the men's game versus the women's game, that the ages in the women's game are the players on average are going to be older when they sort of break in and make their mark, and partly because college is still a major.
My family means the world to me. They're absolutely incredible, and they're all
part of development there, whereas in the men's game,
Right.
if you're 22, you better be an established pro already. Do you imagine a time when that changes at all? I mean, maybe the European clubs getting involved in development changes that, or do we expect that for the foreseeable future, 30 is still going to be prime years for a women's player?
If the U.S. is gonna keep up with the growth of the rest of the world, especially Europe, that has to change. It's great that I can say, hey, Midge is only 2 years out of college now, but that is you can't continue to rely on that system long term, especially when what I've heard from a lot of coaches who are new to NWSL, their first year they are so surprised at the lack of basic skills, what they consider basic skills for players coming out of college, where they're like, players I had in Europe already knew how to do all these things at 15, and I'm having to teach some of those skills to these players at 21, 22. And they're also not trained for a long season because, as we know, the college season is pretty short. So, yeah, that's something that is going to have to change.
Interesting stuff. Jen Cooper, KeeperNotes.com. Fantastic to talk to you as always. Jen, it's good to have you on the program. We need to do it more often. That's on me. We'll do it. I promise.
Thanks so much, Jason. All right.
Jen Cooper on the show.